Imagine a dusty frontier town street falling silent as a lone figure strides forward, coattails drifting behind him. Twin revolvers rest on his hips. His steely gaze sweeps the raucous crowd, daring any troublemaker to test his resolve. This is James Butler Wild Bill Hickok, once a scout and gunslinger, now wearing a lawman's badge. In the late 1860s and early 1870s, Wild Bill Hickok helped bring law and order to some of the wildest towns of the American West. His reputation as a crack shot and fearless enforcer made him a legend in his own time, celebrated in dime novels as one of the early heroes of the West. But behind the legend was a real man walking a fine line between justice and brutality. This documentary-style journey will delve into Hickok's lawman days, where he worked, the gunfights that marked his tenure, and how he was perceived by those who lived through the turbulent taming of the Wild West. Early lawman career before Hickok became a famous frontier marshal, he had already dabbled in law enforcement. In 1858, at just 21, Hickok was appointed a constable in Monticello, Kansas, earning a reputation for fairness and courage even in those early years. His Civil War service as a Union scout and spy only added to his fearless persona. By 1866, after the war, Hickok's gunfighting skill and wartime exploits earned him a deputy U.S. Marshal appointment at Fort Riley, Kansas. These roles set the stage for the most storied chapter of his career, when Wild Bill Hickok became the lawman of volatile frontier towns. He would soon find himself tested in the rough-and-tumble settlements of the Great Plains, where lawlessness reigned and only a quick draw and iron nerves could keep the peace. Hays City in 1869 was a tinderbox of saloons, soldiers, and buffalo hunters, a place so rowdy that the local newspaper dubbed it one of the deadliest places in the West. The citizens of Hays were desperate for someone to impose order. Banking on his growing fame as a gunfighter, they elected James Wild Bill Hickok as the interim sheriff of Ellis County, with Hays City as county seat, in late summer 1869. Standing tall at 6 feet with long hair and a sweeping mustache, Hickok cut an imposing figure. His mere presence, armed with twin Colt revolvers and known as a deadly shot with either hand, often cowed would-be troublemakers. One cowboy recalled how Wild Bill would stand with his back to the wall, looking at everything and everybody under his eyebrows, just like a mad old bull. Ready to charge if provoked, Hickok wasted no time in making his mark as sheriff. He enforced the law with audacity and unflinching resolve, sometimes too unflinching for the town's comfort. One famous episode from his first month in Hays tells of a drunken man galloping through town, firing his gun and vowing to kill the new sheriff. Hickok stepped into the street to face him. As the rider aimed a rifle at Wild Bill, Hickok coolly bluffed, "Don't shoot him in the back, he is drunk," addressing imaginary backup behind the outlaw. When the startled gunman glanced away, Hickok drew and shot him dead with a single bullet. Such tricks and lightning-fast gunplay only fed his legend. But Wild Bill's form of frontier justice was as lethal as it was effective. In another incident just after midnight on September 27, 1869, Hickok and his deputy confronted a group of rowdy, drunken soldiers and buffalo hunters tearing up a local saloon. A brawl broke out, and a belligerent cowboy named Samuel Strawhun lunged at Hickok, who instantly responded by shooting Strawhun in the head, killing him on the spot. The sudden gunshot snuffed out the riot as quickly as it began. In the span of only 5 weeks, Sheriff Hickok had found it necessary to kill 2 men in the name of preserving peace, as one account dryly noted. The good citizens of Hays had wanted a strong enforcer, but now some began to wonder if their new cure was worse than the disease. Hickok's brutal ways were indisputably effective, quelling disorder swiftly, yet many townsfolk were uneasy with the body count. By November 1869, Hays City's residents had to decide if Wild Bill's brand of justice was the kind of law they wanted. In the regular election that fall, they voted Hickok out, electing his own deputy as the new sheriff by 144 votes to 89. Wild Bill's first stint as a lawman had lasted only about 3 months. It was a whirlwind tenure that left Hayes safer, but at a high cost. Even out of office, Hickok's time in Hayes wasn't quite over. In July 1870, during a visit back to the rowdy town, he got into a vicious saloon fight with 2 disorderly U.S. cavalry soldiers. One trooper pinned Hickok down while the other pressed a pistol to the lawman's head. The gun misfired, giving Hickok a split-second opening. He pulled his own revolver and shot both soldiers, killing one and wounding the other. Though technically self-defense, this incident with the 7th Cavalry added to Wild Bill's notorious reputation. To avoid potential retaliation from the military, Hickok wisely slipped away from Hayes after that confrontation. By then, his sights were set on another booming Kansas town in need of taming. In 1871, Abilene, Kansas was a thriving cow town at the end of the Texas to Kansas cattle trail. And it was every bit as wild as Hayes had been. Tens of thousands of longhorn cattle had turned Abilene into a boomtown, teeming with saloons, gamblers, and armed Texas cowboys, flush with cash after long drives. Lawlessness spiked each night as gunslingers and drifters mingled on the streets of the toughest town on the trail. The previous marshal, Tom Bear River Smith, had been decapitated by outlaws while attempting an arrest, a grim reminder of the town's perilous state. City leaders needed a man who could stand up to the worst of the Texas herd boys and gunslingers. Thus, in April 1871, Wild Bill Hickok was hired as the new town marshal of Abilene. Hickok arrived in Abilene with the same imposing persona he'd honed in Hayes. He immediately enforced a no-firearms ordinance in the town. Cowboys had to check their guns when they came into Abilene, and Hickok was not shy about making even notorious gunmen hand over their weapons. One particularly infamous visitor was John Wesley Hardin, a deadly outlaw said to have killed over 20 men. Hardin rode into Abilene under the alias Wesley Clemens. Hoping to enjoy the wild town without drawing attention, Hickok, unaware of Clemens's true identity, still sensed trouble. He sternly told Hardin to stay out of trouble in Abilene and demanded he surrender his pistols per the town's law, which Hardin grudgingly did. For a time, the 2 men were cordial. Hardin later claimed they even gambled together and that Hickok treated him as a friend. Hardin would boast in his autobiography of outdrawing Wild Bill with a trick road agents spin when handing over his guns. But historians doubt this ever happened. In truth, Hardin respected Hickok and knew better than to cross him openly. That uneasy peace didn't last long. In August 1871, Hardin's notorious temper flared. Annoyed by a man snoring too loudly in a hotel nearby, Hardin shot the poor fellow dead in his bed. Wild Bill Hickok moved to arrest Hardin for the cold-blooded murder, but the wily Texan made a swift escape from Abilene before Hickok could get his hands on him. Hardin fled Kansas entirely, reportedly rather than face Wild Bill's justice, and later recounted how relieved he was to avoid a gunfight with Hickok. Marshal Hickok's months in Abilene were filled with tense standoffs and displays of bravado that further burnished his legend. Perhaps the most famous showdown of his lawman career, and tragically his last, took place on October 5, 1871, on a moonlit street in Abilene. That evening, saloon owner Phil Coe, a Texan with a grudge against Hickok, was carousing with a band of about 50 drunken cowboys. The men were armed in defiance of the town ordinance, and Hickok had already warned Coe about not carrying firearms in town. Suddenly, a shot rang out in front of Coe's Bull's Head Tavern. Hickok rushed to the scene to find Coe with a smoking gun. Coe claimed he was shooting at a stray dog, but when Hickok began to reprimand him, Coe's face twisted in anger. The saloon keeper unexpectedly pulled a second revolver and fired 2 shots directly at Hickok. One bullet whistled past, striking the sidewalk. The other ripped through the tail of Hickok's coat. Shockingly, Coe had just attempted to kill the marshal at point-blank range. Before the drunken Coe could fire again, Wild Bill Hickok moved as quick as a thought. In a blur, he drew both of his own revolvers, leveling them at Coe. Hickok fired at least 3 times in rapid succession. 2.36 caliber rounds slammed into Phil Coe's stomach, mortally wounding the Texan, who collapsed in the dust. But Hickok's third shot had also found a mark. As the gun smoke cleared, Hickok saw another figure lying still in the street. To his horror, he realized that in the chaos, a friend had run forward to help him, and Hickok's last bullet struck Mike Williams, one of his own deputies, who had dashed over in the dark to back up Wild Bill Hickok, cradled the dying Williams in his arms, and carried him into a saloon, visibly grief-stricken. The town marshal, who always prided himself on his coolness, had finally been shaken to the core. The shootout with Phil Coe was the climax of Hickok's lawman days. It was said that Hickok was never the same after accidentally killing his friend. In fact, that October night in 1871 proved to be Wild Bill's last gunfight ever. The wild Texas cattle season was ending, and so was Hickok's tenure as marshal. On December 13, 1871, the Abilene City Council released Wild Bill Hickok from his duties, along with his deputies. The official reason was that Abilene had decided to outlaw cattle drives in the future. With the cowboys gone, the town no longer needed an expensive gunslinger marshal to keep order. Unofficially, Hickok's propensity for violence and the public relations fiasco of Williams's death had made the town elders uneasy. Either way, Hickok was dismissed and never wore a lawman's badge again. At 34 years old, Wild Bill Hickok's career as a frontier law officer had come to an end after only a couple of tumultuous years. Wild Bill Hickok's time as a lawman was short-lived but enormously influential in shaping his enduring legend. In his own day, opinions about him varied greatly depending on whom you asked. To the rowdy elements of the frontier, the drunks, desperados, and belligerent cowboys, Hickok was a figure to be feared. His lightning-fast draw and willingness to kill gave him an intimidating aura. As a Hays City journalist noted, Hickok's less-than-restrained methods did indeed bring a kind of brutal peace. Law-abiding citizens in the cow towns had a grudging respect for Hickok's results, but many also felt uneasy about his trigger-happy style of law enforcement. In Hays, they showed their disapproval at the ballot box by voting him out despite the calmer streets. In Abilene, the town council concluded that Wild Bill's brand of six-shooter justice was a solution they could afford to send on its way once the immediate danger had passed. Hickok's friends and contemporaries, however, often described him in more glowing terms. General George Armstrong Custer and his wife were fond of Wild Bill. Mrs. Libby Custer recalled Hickok as a delight to look upon, praising his poise and handsome, commanding presence. Indeed, Hickok was widely acknowledged as a gentleman when not provoked, polite, soft-spoken, and even elegant in attire. Fellow lawman and showman Buffalo Bill Cody admired Hickok, having known him since youth, and would later preserve Hickok's legacy in his Wild West shows. On the other hand, notorious gunmen like John Wesley Hardin begrudgingly respected Hickok's authority. Hardin's own memoir admits he viewed Hickok as a damn Yankee, but also as a man he dared not trifle with in Abilene. The fact that Hardin fled town rather than test Hickok's draw speaks volumes about Wild Bill's reputation among his peers. The Eastern press and popular imagination also played a huge role in how Hickok was perceived during and after his lawman period. Sensationalized newspaper stories and dime novels turned Wild Bill into a larger-than-life hero of the Wild West. As early as 1867, magazine writer Colonel George Ward Nichols published an account of Hickok's exploits, some of them wildly embellished by Hickok himself in a bit of frontier showmanship, painting him as the ultimate gunfighter. These tales, often claiming Hickok had gunned down dozens of outlaws, were outlandish and often fabricated, but they captivated the public. Hickok's real record, according to careful historians, is that he killed perhaps 6 or 7 men in his lawman years, not counting the Civil War, and only in situations he deemed unavoidable. Still, the image of Wild Bill Hickok as the fearless lawman with deadly aim took on a life of its own. He became one of the first bona fide celebrities of the American West. During his brief stint keeping the peace in Deadwood, Dakota Territory in 1876, a job he took just before his death, Hickok mainly relied on the legend of his name to keep trouble at bay rather than his diminishing eyesight or gun skills. Simply being Wild Bill was enough to maintain order, a testament to how notorious he had become. In the end, Wild Bill Hickok's lawman days were a study in contrasts. He was both the peacemaker and the instigator of violence, a hero to some and a villain to others. With his twin Colts and nerves of steel, he brought law to lawless places, if only for a short time, and often at the edge of a knife or the barrel of a gun. Hickok's time wearing a badge lasted barely 2 years, yet those years burned brightly in the annals of the Old West. They transformed a former scout and sharpshooter into a living legend. Contemporary writers and storytellers ensured that the name Wild Bill would echo far beyond Kansas, capturing imaginations in the East and overseas. Even today, we remember Hickok stalking the crooked streets of Hays City and Abilene, calm under fire, dealing rough justice with a quick trigger. His lawman days, filled with courage, controversy, and drama, cemented Wild Bill Hickok's place as an icon of the American frontier. In the volatile theater of the Old West, Hickok played the role of the fearless lawman to perfection, and it is that image of Wild Bill, Colts drawn at dusk on a dusty street, that endures in history and myth alike.